Welcome. My name is Michelle Yun Maplethorpe, and I'm delighted to be here tonight to welcome you to the Asia Society at the Movies discussion on Coup 53, our opening film and exclusive preview prior to its international launch for our month-long series, So You Think You Know Iran. The series is curated with Hamid Kiarostami, who is an Asia 21 Fellow here at Asia Society and is co-presented with DocuNight, an initiative of the Kiarostami Foundation. I'm thrilled now to introduce director Taghi Amirani and editor Walter Murch for a discussion on the story of Operation Ajax, the CIA M16 stage coup in 1953 in Iran that overthrew Prime Minister Mossadegh. We're honored to celebrates established and emerging voices, contemporary films and classics, and documentaries. In this program series, we present films both on a streaming platform, which can be watched around the world, where there are Asia Society centers, and also live events, which moving forward, we hope to showcase more and invite you to visit our Asia Society Museum. Please visit our website for more details or just search online for Asia Society at the Movies for more information about this series and other upcoming events. I'd like to also mention that in conjunction with this series, we currently have on view until May 8th at Asia Society Museum in New York at 725 Park Avenue, the exhibition Rebel Jester Mystic Poet, Contemporary Persians from the Mohammed Afkhami Collection. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our members out there. We cherish your support and we could not do our important work without you. And for those of you who are not yet members, we encourage you to get involved. You may find more information about joining membership of Asia Society on our website. The discussion is approximately 45 minutes long and was pre-recorded. So now please join me in welcoming the film's creators who will be speaking with Professor Dabashi this evening. First, it's my pleasure to introduce producer, director, and co-writer Taghi Amirani. Mr. Amirani is an Iranian science graduate and a TED Senior Fellow who shifted his focus from physics to filmmaking. His student film in 1984 was a documentary about black holes titled Shades of Black. He's since made 30 documentaries for major international networks, including PBS, National Geographic, the BBC, France 2, and British Channel 4. His subjects include eccentricities of the British, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the crash of Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 into Jupiter in 1994, and life behind the scenes in an Iranian newspaper. Amirani's latest work is Coup 53, a theatrical feature documentary about the 1953 M16 CIA coup in Iran. Containing never-seen-before material and a provocative revelation of new material, the film is edited and co-written by multi-Oscar-winning Walter Murch. Coup 53 was nominated for the 2019 BFI Gerston Award and the British Independent Film Awards. It won the Crystal Phoenix for Best Documentary at the 39th Fajr International Film Festival and the Audience Award for Best International Documentary at the 2019 Vancouver International Film Festival. Taghi has been a jury member for the International Emmys, BAFTA, the Royal Television Society, and Sheffield DocuFest. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce editor and co-writer Walter Murch. Murch's 6 decades in cinema as an editor, sound mixer, writer, and director stretches back to 1969 as part of Francis Ford Coppola's The Rain People. He has contributed to The Godfather 1, 2, and 3, American Graffiti, The Conversation, Apocalypse Now, The English Patient, Touch of Evil, and many other films with esteemed directors such as George Lucas, Fred Zimmerman, Philip Kaufman, Anthony Minghella, Catherine Bigelow, Sam Mendes, and Brad Bird. Murch has been nominated for 9 Academy Awards and has won 3 Oscars. He recently edited and co-wrote the documentaries Particle Fever, directed by Mark Levinson, and Coup 53. And finally, I'm so proud to introduce our esteemed moderator, Professor Hamid Dabashi. Professor Dabashi is the Hagop Kevorkian Professor of Iranian Studies and Comparative Literature at Columbia University. He's the author of many books and essays on Iranian and world cinema. It's a great pleasure to welcome these esteemed guests to Asia Society for this exciting conversation, and I thank you again for joining us.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Hamid Dabashi. I teach at Columbia University in New York, and I am talking to you from New York. I would like to begin by thanking Rachel Cooper, who is the person in charge of culture as diplomacy in Asia Society. Those of you who are not New Yorkers, you have to know that Asia Society is institution that we greatly love and admire. And as a result, the screening of this absolutely extraordinary film, Coup 53, by Taghi Amirani and Walter Murch at Asia Society is a major cultural and, I might ask, political event that I would like to be on the record to how grateful I am to be part of the conversation. But far more important than me are the 2 principal people responsible for this film, Taghi Amirani, Iranian filmmaker, and Walter Murch, a distinguished and accomplished editor and filmmaker and a celebratory figure in the industry as a literally ingenious editor. And it is not an exaggeration for me to suggest that figures like Sergei Eisenstein and Giga Vartov, these legendary figures in the history of cinema, all the way down to David Lane. Do you remember that famous shot of David Lane in Lawrence of Arabia, the match, blowing it, and then suddenly we are in the thing? We are in the presence of absolutely ingenious filmmaker. And I have already told Walter Murch how his way of editing has actually influenced my writing. So without further ado, I would like to begin by simply asking Taghi Amirani and Walter Murch to say a few words at the beginning, introducing their own films before we engage in a conversation. And I will map out the conversation shortly. We don't have that much time. We have 45 to 60 minutes. And I would like to give much of the time to the 2 distinguished filmmakers themselves to discuss their films. So just initial thought, Taghi, of how you began to to conceive of this film. And more importantly, I think, is how did you convince Walter Murch to join you in this extraordinary project? Taghi?
Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be talking to you. And again, thanks to Asia Society for hosting both the screening of the film and the Q&A. As you know, with Iranians, Bisashto Mordad, the coup, is almost embedded in our psyche. You don't have to say anything to an Iranian except Bisashto Mordad, and that evokes all sorts of memories and ideas and thoughts and feelings which have been passed from generation to generation. And that applies to me too. I first heard about Mossadegh's name in whispers in late night conversations when I was about 7 years old. My parents and uncles would be speaking about the the day's events, and they would whisper this one word. And I never knew what it was. As a 7-year-old, you don't know, but you just think, why are they whispering? What's that? I later grew up, found out more, studied, and found out the whole history. I remember when I was in Iran at school in Persian classes, they were history of oil. And they said, well, this is not BP, it's benzine pars. It's your oil. Don't worry about it. It's benzine pars, it's not BP. So I thought that all these things kind of churned in the back of my mind. I ended up being a TV documentary maker for about 20 years, making lots of films before I felt confident enough or ready enough to tackle what is effectively the film of my life. This is probably the most important film I've ever made or will make. And what I didn't think was that it was going to take 10 years to make. I first had the idea in 2009. The other thing, I never imagined in my wildest dreams that the gods of cinema were going to give me the greatest gift of cinema, which is Walter Murch. And the story of serendipity and how things lined up, and I say gods of cinema made it happen, how we came to meet, would surprise you, it came through physics, but Walter can tell it better than I can.
Let me just add one word before we give the floor to Walter. You know, you and I are the same generation, and the trauma of Coup of 53, as you say, we use the Persian calendar, Bistashte Mordad. I have put it in writing, is the single most traumatic historical events of the 20th century Iranians. I always say that we Iranians have a very long span of history. So the coup of 53 sits right to the Mongol invasion of the 13th century, the Arab invasion of the 7th century, and Alexander the Great's conquest of Iran. So Alexander the Great, Arab invasion, the Mongol invasion, and then the coup of 53. So you're absolutely correct that this is the historical trauma of our generation. Years ago, I was writing a book with Peter Cherkovsky, and then we were co-authoring a book about iconography of the revolution. And at some point, Peter said, Hamid, I think we know that the Americans and the British did the coup of 53. You have said it about 15 times in the course of this book. Let's just stop to it, because it's like a knee-jerk reaction that we have. So, Walter, please.
Yes, I was working, editing another documentary in New York in 2012, searching for the Higgs boson, the effort at CERN in Geneva to uncover the last of the particles of particle physics. And the gentleman who was partially financing that film was also an investor in Taghi's film. And it turned out there was an event on the anniversary of the coup, as it just happened, at his apartment. And that's where I met Taghi. And Taghi graduated from university in physics. So we just started talking about physics. And he came to see this film. We were at that point where we were inviting people to come and look at the film. And he got very excited about it, and actually helped us over an obstacle, which was that festivals had kept turning the film down because it was too sciencey. So he pulled some contacts out of his wallet and got us into the Sheffield Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award. So that led to us going on to Telluride, and the film became and Taghi and I kept up our relationship, and he was raising money to make Coup 53, primarily from investors in Silicon Valley. And my wife and I lived just north of San Francisco. And so he would stay at our house, and he'd go down to Silicon Valley and shake the can, come back with some pennies, much more than pennies, and we would count them and go on our way. And I didn't think that I would ever get involved in the film, but it just happened that the film that I was working on came to an end, and I was at loose ends, and Taghi and my wife, Aggie, Taghi and Aggie, put their heads together and said, what Walter needs is a little short job in London for 6 months or so to finish off this documentary. Taghi had shot about 50 hours of material by that point. And so I thought, yes, absolutely. I love working on documentaries, especially unscripted documentaries where you don't really know where it's going to wind up. Of course, as Alfred Hitchcock said, in fiction films, the director is God. In documentaries, God is the director. So 6 months turned into now more than 6 years that we have been either making the film or trying to get the film distributed and fending off potential people who wanted to sabotage the film because, it's a very complicated, wonderful story. But here we are, almost 7 years since I started working on this film.
There are, as you both know, Taghi and Walter, there is a false, I would consider it a false controversy that has been created around the figure of Norman Derbyshire by the people in charge of the movie, of the documentary called The End of Empire. I want to get that out of the way because far more important is actually talking to Taghi, telling us what is specific about his film, his visual documentary vision of the film, and then to Walter about sort of what approach, what logic, what rhetoric did he follow in cutting it. The false controversy has to do with the fact that you use the documented, transcribed evidence of an interview, of a conversation with Norman Derbyshire. There is no controversy about that fact. And there probably has been, as you argue, a video version of it, but we don't have access to that video version of it for whatever reason. One not resort to conspiratorial theories. You ask a distinguished artist, actor, Reef Fiennes, to enact that documented. You have not created it. Is all in the record. So what amuses me, Taghi, is that these British producers have no idea what Iranian have this obsession with the coup of 53. No, if you go to India, it's the same situation. Indian historians are now asking for reparation of what the British did in India. So yes, for us, Iranian, the coup of 53 is extremely important, but it is not just Iran, it's all over the map. So I want to, in my opinion, as I read in the literature, there is a sort of a false attention about to this controversy, as if the coup is controversial. The coup is not controversial. It happened. 1954, a year after that, a CIA operative wrote an internal memorandum, History of the Coup, Wilbur. There is no controversy about that. I remember during 1978, Kermit Roosevelt wrote an account of his role in the coup. The year 2000, when a copy of that thing was released, New York Times wrote a long expose about what happened. Then the documents were released. Then my distinguished colleague, Kinzer, wrote a monumental, wonderful book based on the thing. And then subsequently, perhaps the most distinguished historian of Iran, Ervan Abrahamian wrote another book on the event. So there is no President Obama in Cairo in 2009 apologized for it. Late Secretary of State Madeleine Albright confessed and apologized. So it is important for the audience in Asia Society to realize this false flag of a controversy, but is not about the coup. The coup happened. From the President of the United States to the Secretary of State to distinguished historians, etc., they have all documented. There is no controversy. It happened. Now, that brings me to the essential question, Taghi, that I want to ask you. Of course, you know all of this history because of your own investigation of the project. What madness prompted you to opt for a movie, for a documentary? Because if it is a historian like Stephen Kinzer or Ervan Abrahamian, you just get hold of the documents, sit in the privacy of your home and start writing the book and get it out of your way. But this running of a whole army of fundraising in California, this and that, what was it, if you could share with us? What was it that you thought it has to be in the form of a documentary or visual evidence that compelled you to go in that direction?
Well, the sheer power of movies as a storytelling, as an emotional machine that connects with the audience, you can't match that. I'm not a scholar or historian. I'm not a journalist. I couldn't do all the Shah's Men or Ervan Abrahamian's books, but I can make films. It was purely an instinctive feeling that there is more to this, and I've got to dig deeper, and I've got to do it for myself. The other reason was that it has to be a film that's made from a perspective of an Iranian who's also Anglo-Iranian, so he can see both sides of the bridge. It had to speak to more Iranians than have ever been spoken to, hearing authentic Iranian voices. I wanted to hear Persian spoken on the film by people who were still alive, who were involved directly or indirectly. So that authentic voice, both in the voice of the filmmaker and the interviewees, was important. Telling it in a compelling way that reaches beyond the borders of Iran. As you know, we've just talked about this, Iranians know the story. In fact, even Iranians who knew the story now think, wow, we found out new stuff, because we have found new stuff. But the important thing was to tell people who know nothing about it. For a lot of Westerners, let's just take the Americans. For a lot of Americans, Iran starts in '79 and the hostage crisis. That's the ground zero. That's where the reference. But I wanted to say, hang on, wait. There is a backstory. In fact, why we are here is because we were there, and that story is important. And as evidence, 80–90% of audiences in physical screenings, when we could have in cinemas, came up and said, "I had no idea. I'm so sorry for what we did." So those elements were all part of why I wanted to make this film, and it had been bubbling in the back of my mind. I had to be mature enough, and I realized, in fact, when I started, I didn't have the experience or the maturity or the wisdom to make it. I made the film on the hoof as I learned, and I learned with Walter Murch, and that was the beauty of it. And Walter has his own ideas of why it was important to tell the story the way we did.
Regarding the sort of putting the history back from 79 to 53 is, of course, crucial. So we have a larger frame of reference. But at the same time, I always, when I do that, when I put the sort of a starting point to 53, I even go back to the Constitutional Revolution, when we have two extraordinary Americans who were devoted to the Constitutional Revolution. One was Morgan Schuster, who was a financier and who was in charge of the revolutionaries' bookkeeping. And he wrote a magnificent book, Strangling of Persia, against the Russian and British intervention in the course of the Constitutional Revolution. So this historicization is not anti-American. It is placing it history. The other extraordinary character is Howard Baskerville, who gave his life. He was a Christian missionary in Tabriz, as you know, and he joined the revolutionaries and he gave his life. And if I were you, I would do your next film on Howard Baskerville. And from now on, make sure that Walter is on board with it. Absolutely extraordinary. He was a Che Guevara of the Constitutional Revolution. young, charismatic character who went there to as a missionary, but turned out to become a revolutionary. So this sort of moving the frame of reference back from 79 to 53, it is in terms of in interest of history. Walter, I want to come back to you and ask you what, in the substance of the event, in the substance of the coup, interested you as a filmmaker, not by sort of serendipity that you and your wife sort of knew Taghi. When you saw the material, when you saw the idea of it, if you could talk a little bit more sort of technically, how much rushes were done, and how did you connect with it as an editor, as a filmmaker who saw there's a drama in there, and in what way was it different, say, from Apocalypse Now or from Conversation and from your all other wonderful work? What was it specific about this project that interested you?
Yeah, I will talk about that in a second, but I just wanted to go back a few paragraphs and say that certainly the coup is not controversial, except for the fact that the British government to this day has not admitted that they were involved in it. And there are many instances where Taghi and I would go to briefings with the Foreign Service, public events, and questions would be asked about the coup of 1953, and suddenly arms were crossed over chests and the words were spoken, "We don't talk about that." Neither confirm nor deny. So the testimony of Norman Derbyshire, who was a co-author of the coup with Donald Wilbur, who was an MI6 agent. As Taghi said, he'd been in Iran since 1943 at the age of 19. He spoke Farsi and knew Iran down at the street level. And then he was the man who was directing the coup for the British from exile in Cyprus through radio contact with the Rashidian brothers, who were his main enforcers on the street. And at a certain point, excuse me, the CIA, after the first failed version of the coup, decided to call it off. They said, no, we have to settle with Mossadegh. He's got too much support. And it was Norman Derbyshire who, without consulting either MI6 or CIA, called out the mob on the streets and ordered the burning of newspapers and other things that re-inflamed the process. So his interview, in which he admits all of these things and also admits to being involved in the kidnapping, torture, and murder of the General Afshartouz, who was one of Mossadegh's main supporters. We didn't know any of this in any kind of detail when we began the project. In fact, when we sketched out a storyline that might guide us through 532 hours of material, we also included a story card with the letter X on it, meaning the mystery that we hope we will uncover. And sure enough, after about a year and a bit, Taghi went to interview Mossadegh's grandson in Paris, and this gentleman had been an advisor on the End of Empire program, in which Norman Derbyshire had given an interview, which was later not included in the final press. And Taghi came back from Paris with a stack of papers, and hidden in this was a transcript of this interview with margin notes by the filmmakers about how important it was. So that immediately raised we began smelling a story here that was dynamic, that the film was not simply going to be a historical recounting of as Taghi said, the 4 days of the coup rather than the 3 days of the Condor. That something had been hidden. Why was it hidden? Where is the material itself? And it was following that particular trail, as when you see the movie, that you see how this story evolved. So I had worked on Sam Mendes's Jarhead, which was about the first Gulf War in 1990. And so I doing research on that, I found out about Mossadegh. I was 10 years old at the time of the coup in 1953. I was aware of politics as a 10-year-old, but I didn't know about what was going on in Iran, and because it was still pretty much a secret. But I was aware of the atomic bomb and the Russians and the McCarthy stuff, all of which in some way enters into the structure of this film. And as you can also see, it's very dynamic. I mentioned that Taghi had shot perhaps 50 hours of material by 2015. And at the end, when we summed it all up, we had 10 times that amount, well over 500 hours. And so what you see in the film is a story that emerges as a rolling tsunami of events and mysteries and dead ends and live ends, and ultimately led us to the point where, not being able to find the audio or the video, the film of this Derbyshire interview, we decided to get an actor to come in and read the lines, because hearing of words is much better than reading them, as Taghi mentioned. And then we thought, well, let's see if we can get a name actor to come in and photograph him as he reads the words, because an image is much better than just the audio. And that led to me thinking of Ray Fiennes, because I'd worked with him on The English Patient back in 1995 and 1996. And we had kept up correspondence over the years. And we managed to get an audience with him and show him some of the film. And he immediately got the idea of what we were asking and said, the only problem is scheduling it. How can we schedule it? Because he was playing Mark Antony at the National Theater in Antony and Cleopatra. Many twists and turns to that, but in the end, we photographed Norman Derbyshire, or Ray Fiennes as Norman Derbyshire, in the same room at the Savoy Hotel where many of the other interviews were conducted with the coup plotters on the British side, who were available to be interviewed in 1983, 30 years after the coup. So that's it in a nutshell. My guiding principle that we put up, and Taghi can say it in Persian, but my guiding principle is dense clarity, clear density. Try to be as clear as possible, but as solid as possible. And the image for that is a diamond, which is dense and clear, with lots of facets to it that reflect light brilliantly. And the reverse of that, which is, if you are dense, try to make it as clear as possible. And so I'll turn it over to Taghi here to supply the missing words.
I will turn to Taghi in a minute, but I think, Walter, in your detailed response, I detect the passion, the pivot that kind of focus your work, which is the figure of Norman Derbyshire. The fact that you did not have access to actual visual interview has given the film its signature excitement. Suddenly you have this world-renowned actor coming and doing this piece. Is a surprising, exciting, very cinematic moment that is both truthful and yet has a cinematic quality to it. So I can't, and then I also saw in one of the videos that you kindly sent me, when you do an analysis, a perfect editor's analysis of the section on Stephen Mead, that what sections were taken out and what sections were included. Stephen Mead, as you say, tell the story, was a close friend of Derbyshire. They collaborated with each other, they knew each other, and in a absolutely astonishing way, through your professional expertise as an editor, you reconstruct a relationship, a friendly relationship between Mead and Derbyshire that implicates that there has been a consciousness and awareness, not off the record, not deep throat, as you call it, referring to the American case, but a much closer relationship. So to me, what is exciting is how, in the figure of Derbyshire, in the technical analysis that you do with Taghi, in that wonderful moment that you're having the Steve Mead interview in front of you, you have a cinematic insight into a political event that cannot be denied. But it's not a question of denying that. Now goes back, I give the floor to Taghi in a moment, that you really have an insightful, revelatory cinematic moment into a political event.
Yes.
Taghi?
I just, before Taghi answered, I'd just like to say, Stephen Mead, who is the CIA counterpart to Norman Derbyshire, who was the man who Eisenhower sent over in October of 1953 to help the Shah set up SAVAK, also does not appear in End of Empire. End of Empire interviewed him, and it was the only interview he ever gave at any point in his life. And he was intimately involved with Norman Derbyshire. They're on a first-name basis with each other, as you can see in the film. And yet neither of them appeared in End of Empire. And from a cinematic point of view, their relationship is catnip. And so the fact that End of Empire did not include either of those interviews, for whatever reason they come up with to explain it, is it doesn't pass for me the smell test of why such two people were not included in the program.
Yeah. No, there's just so much fantastic material here for me to think about. You used earlier the phrase false controversy. If the British state has not admitted to its critical role, lead role in the coup to this day, to this hour and minute right now that we're talking here, if they haven't admitted to it, the Derbyshire interview, the testimony, stands in for the most compelling British admission, because he is the operative who wrote, masterminded, and conducted and directed the coup. So Derbyshire is the golden crown of Coup 53's finding. Even in their attacks on the film, and I have to give credit to End of Empire in two ways. In order to distract from the film's main compelling revelation, the Derbyshire interview proves, says it from the horse's mouth, as it were, the British role in the absence of a British admission. So they don't deny that. In fact, in their press release, they go and say, all kudos to Coup 53. They're definitely the first documentary to bring Derbyshire's words to life. Hoorah for that. That is beyond a doubt. But they created a false controversy around this by shouting fire over there. So all kudos to them. In order to derail the attention on the film, maybe even deter distributors, they created a false fire and smoke alarm. Over there, taking away the attention of what this film is revealing. They were very clumsy and really not together in the arguments they put forward for the false controversy they created. This is our interview. Yeah, these are his words. Yes. But it was deep throat. It was background. It was off the record, and we never filmed him. Now, by doing that, they've actually dug a whole bunch of holes, which will be revealed in the follow-up that we're making, including the fantastic forensics with Stephen Mead and Derbyshire that you've referred to. What you've seen in that video of the Pacific Film Archives, that clip is not in the film, but will be in the follow-up, and it'll be also in the so-called DVD extras. So that will be shared with everyone. I I really don't know what they were on about, what they were really trying to do. They partly succeeded, but they partly failed in that the film is intact. In fact, by attacking our film, they drew the most extraordinary attention to the film. Werner Herzog, Oliver Stone, Michael Moore, people who would never even give a glimpse or a second to this film came out fighting for it. Thank you, End of Empire, for putting our film on the map in the way you did, because, you know, we wouldn't have had that kind of attention. And so there'll be more revelations about where they dug themselves into holes. All the film does is get a multi-sided account. We talk to the End of Empire people, two of them. We talk to a journalist, Nigel Hawkes. We talk to Stephen Dorrell. We talk to the cameraman. We talk to Matin Daftari. They give different perspectives. We don't distort or stitch them up. We present those facts as they're given in those interviews. We let the audience to make up their minds. Never anywhere in the film, Walter and I say, Derbyshire was filmed. We can prove it. We can't. We weren't there. We don't have the footage. We can't do that. We have these people who say these things, and then we present the interview itself.
In my opinion, Taghi, we're kind of running time, so I want to get into another issue. As you rightly said, these people have done you great service and brought the film to a much wider and influential audience. And as we say in Persian, "Adu bavad sabab khair gar khuda khahad." Your enemy will be source of good for you if so God wishes. So I wouldn't worry. But my recommendation is just you stop worrying about that. That is right now has assumed a reality unto itself.
Yeah.
If the British don't want to admit what they have done, you know, they are just being silly and obnoxious, and nobody cares about the people who are silly and obnoxious. Recently, I wrote a piece about BBC was doing a series about fake news. I said, but it's all about India fake news and Africa fake news. I said, well, that's wonderful for us to know about fake news, but BBC itself was in the business of fake news when it was integral to the coup of 53. But my question, I want to change it into a different direction,
yeah.
which is as you know, the coup of 53 coincided with the Bay of Pig, with the similar event in Guatemala. Soon after that, with the Suez Canal sort of invasion by the British and the French and the Israelis. My question is, do you have plans or for showing the film, say, in Latin America? People in Cuba and in Guatemala would be very much interested in what you have done. Or doing similarly, say, in the Arab world, or doing similar way in India. So there are other comparative contexts where your film has larger resonances that you no longer really need to worry about some silly British government for their own bureaucratic reasons that they don't want to admit. Who cares? Yeah. There have been so many confirmations of this. This single, I wouldn't say, I mean, I'm hesitant to say what I'm about to say. Your discovery of Norman Derbyshire is extremely important. Yes, of course. But it is not, I mean, there is a larger frame of reference in which he fits. So moving on. Walter, do you want to talk about, say, how would this film be seen in Latin America, in Guatemala, in Cuba, you know, in the larger, in Chile, you know, all the places that the US has been involved in similar, if not identical, acts of regime change?
Yes, absolutely. We are we are pursuing getting distribution in these territories, finding the best path to do that. We have been frustrated, despite the fact that the film is the best reviewed film of any film I've ever worked on. It has 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes with 44 reviews, which puts it in a select group of only 109 other films in the history of cinema have received that kind of approbation critically. And yet no distributor will pick the film up. And so there's another mystery there, which you know, has to do with why is that? And so we're pursuing those lines, but we so far have not had any success.
We are talking to people about distribution in Latin America. There's a potential opening through Mexico. We had some connections through actually Walter's childhood friend Ariel Dorfman into Chile. We've got plans even without official mainstream distribution. We have plans for self-distribution in India. I give you a little tiny anecdote. When the film was released in 2020, we had little social media clips, tiny clips from the film that were representing what the film could be about. And we picked a bit about Churchill and the Anglo-Iranian oil company looting all the oil without giving any percentage of the profits to the Iranians. That was a minute and a half. And I put that on Facebook with targeted advertising into India only. And within a day and a half, it had 1.5 million views and the most incredible heated debate in the comment section. And I kept thinking, my God, if only the film was available right now in India, just imagine how many people will follow and watch. Well, we are definitely resonating with all the nations, and there are many, I think 62 I counted, who've had coups and regime change courtesy of the CIA. Every one of those territories is a very receptive audience for Coup 53, and we are definitely working on that. And you're very right to highlight that very particular interest beyond Derbyshire.
Exactly. As you know, in this age of internet, and I saw you have a wonderful website that anybody around the globe can see it. You don't have to be in India or in Egypt or in Guatemala. People can have access to it. Nevertheless, I think there is a point to be made about this film, actually, with you and Walter, the two of you going with the film and discussing it and engaging. In relation to that, now I have a specific question, Taghi, for you. As you know, there are revisionist historians in Iran that are beginning to ask, oh no, it was not CIA, it was some other Iranian mullah or this and that. Are you going to produce a Persian version of this specifically for an Iranian audience?
Well, we already have a Persian version, fully subtitled. We spend a lot of time getting every word right. You know, the art of subtitling is very subtle. It's, as you know, it's not literal. You have to embody the spirit of what's being said. We have the most incredible Persian subtitles. The film has been available in Iran for over a year. It won the Crystal Seymour for Best Documentary at Fash Film Festival and the Audience Award at Cinema Verite. It's available to, and in fact, even before COVID went crazy, it had a theatrical run in Iran. I used to get messages from people in Esfahan and Mashhad saying, I've just seen your amazing film, thank you for making it. So Iranians have watched it, loved it. My inbox is full of heartfelt messages from young Iranians who were born after the revolution, right? You know, that's the kind of their extent of historical knowledge. And they are constantly thanking Walter and me for telling our own story to us. We have Spanish subtitles, both Spanish and Latin American Spanish. We have French subtitles, so it's all ready. And we are planning, this might be first exclusive here. We have huge plans for the 70th anniversary of the coup next year. So
I want to come back and conclude with you. I think we're running out of time. And ask for your thoughts and reflections on the contemporary relevance, not just the historical. As you know, President Biden in Poland made a reference, Putin cannot stay in power, and then White House had to walk that back, that he didn't mean a regime change in Russia. But the history of regime change in US is not limited to Iran. What do you think today, 2022, in this particular post-Trumpian period, considering the Asia Society audience that will be first seeing this, what are the implications? What are your thoughts that you wish to share with that audience?
Well, Harry Truman said, there is nothing new in the world except a history you do not know. And so history has a kind of crazy habit of repeating itself. I mean, if you look at the US-Iran relations for the last 43 years, and even now, sanctions on oil, fake news, talks of regime change, assassinating generals devoted to the regime. So there are a lot of parallels that never seem to go away. I think for me, the critical thing is for people who don't know the context of the toxic relationship to understand it better by watching the film, and we know that works. We know when people say they have this kind of aha moment. As for other contemporary resonances, I don't know. I mean, I've been distracted by other family stuff, so I haven't followed the Ukraine war and what Biden has been saying, but I'm glad that he backtracked on the whole regime change idea. But, you know, my brother made a film about the Iraq war and, you know, the whole regime change in Iraq. We know how well that went. It seems to me we never learn from history.
Walter, I'm going to give the last words to you. Simply about where would you play? You have such an illustrious career as a filmmaker. Where would you place your experience, your affection, your attachment, or your commitment to this film in the more general context of your career as an extraordinary filmmaker?
Well, I think if you just look at the numbers, I've been involved with Coup 53 for 6 years, and I've been working in film for 50 years. So that's whatever the math of that is. Maybe a 1/12 of my entire career has been dedicated to Coup 53. I'm nearing 79 years old. It's likely that I will not edit another film at this point. I'm writing a book right now, which is going to take me another year or so. So it's a capstone to a career, I would say, and I'm very happy with that. It's if I have to go out with Coup 53, that's perfectly fine with me.
As a student and an admirer of your wonderful work, Walter, what a fantastic capstone that would be to your illustrious career, and how lucky not just Taghi as a filmmaker, but Iranians in general have been that you took on this project. And as I implicated in the last part of my question, the larger world at the mercy of these colonial designs, when these people thought they can cut and paste whatever they want around the globe, in India, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. And then finally somebody with precision and investigative work and cinematic panache, putting this
and luck
signature on this that nobody can deny. I mean, the British government is just being silly and obnoxious, and who cares about silly and obnoxious people?
Yeah, I'd like to add one final thought. I mean, we've talked about this, what a gift it is. It is no exaggeration, and I'm to say that this film is Walter Murch's. Like every frame beats with Walter Murch. I have never shied away from saying that this was the luckiest break I had as a filmmaker. Imagine you making the most important film of your life about the most pivotal moment in the history of your country, as far as in your life, in your you know, imagination, and then you get Walter Murch to work on it. And Walter is not just the editor of this film; he's the co-writer, quite rightly so, because he helped me make this film like no other editor on the planet could have. I could not imagine of any other person who would have made Coup 53 what it is. And that is, and the other thing is that no matter what silly shenanigans the British come up with in trying to derail this film and kill its truth, because they cannot handle the truth, this film will last. This film will outlast me and everybody else, and its truth will get out there in the best possible way. That I'm sure.
Simply as one viewer who happens to be both an Iranian and a New Yorker. Walter is a New Yorker like me.
Yes.
I want to express my gratitude, my admiration, my love, not just for the truth that you have managed to tell so brilliantly, but for the artistry and for creating a work of art. The two of you, both as the co-creators of this extraordinary work, for which I am grateful as one viewer among millions of others. Rachel tells me that she wants to come in and say a few words before we conclude.
I just want to thank all three of you. This has been a really insightful conversation, and I think it is so important the way you tell history, the way the story unfolds, and that you've done that through cinema, through animation. It really comes alive, and at a time where I feel that we are much more global in a new way that we have yet to grapple with. This film is really important because it really, as you so rightly said, not only is very specific and about Iran, but it is really about a global phenomenon that we are all working to figure out in the post-colonial, hopefully post-colonial world, and one where we're asking those questions as well. So I just want to thank all of you. I want to tell everyone that we will be having So You Think You Know Iran, our documentary film series that we are co-presenting with DocuNight, and that has been curated by Ahmad Kiarostami, and that we are just grateful to you for kicking off this film, what we feel is a very important film series. And to all three of you, thank you so much for being so generous in your time.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure. Taghi, lovely seeing you. Walter, delighted to make your acquaintance, and all the best.
Thank you for
Okay,
a fantastic
thank you.
Q&A. That was fantastic.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.